This is the face of Pex.
But I'm not listening to the...
I've gotten a little bit loopy. That's all I can say.
Go away, go somewhere else.
I can't even,
Go swimming. Bye.
I'm not human. I'm not human right now. I don't know what's happened, but I have totally cracked.
Close the door. Close the door.
I'm like, I don't know. I'm good. I'm good. I am so not good. I am just falling apart.
It is kind of insane how much I am just falling apart right now, and everything sort of sucks.
Everything is fine. There's room for this too. This too shall pass. Namaste. I'ma stay in bed. That's what I'ma do. I'ma stay in bed.
I'll do nothing. What if I ran away? What if I made everyone do all their own crap?
All right. Welcome to my tutorial about post-event collapse syndrome. I wanted to make this video while I'm calling it the Pex ditch. So let's define post-event collapse syndrome for a minute. Newton's third law is that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the best analogy I can think of is the little marble thing. Take a look. You might remember this from your childhood. If you move 2 marbles into a stack of marbles, 2 comes out the other side. If you move 3 marbles into a stack of marbles, 3 comes out the other side. This is a law of energy distribution. So this concept of this law of motion and law of how energy works is really easy to apply to a post-event collapse. For example, all of the energy and output that someone might put into their child's wedding, all of the emotional highs are gonna have emotional lows when that wedding ends. All of that energy expenditure when that wedding ends is gonna be felt as energy exhaustion. That's one of the easiest examples I can think of where it's really strongly correlated that what goes up must come down. And to the same measure of the energy input you have put in at the beginning, you're gonna feel that in a deficit, in an equal measure. This is actually good news for a couple of reasons. One, you can plan for it. If you know that there is something going on and you have to just overextend, you can plan ahead. Plan to have no commitments for the next 3-4 days. Plan to give yourself pillows. You're essentially putting the pillows on the ground. You know you're gonna fall down. And you're putting the pillows down to make the landing softer and to really hold space for yourself during that season of collapse. But the other way that this knowledge is helpful is in a preventative capacity. For example, I used to get a lot more pecs from going on vacation than I do now. And the reason for that is I used to overextend myself on vacation, making sure we did all the things, giving all my attention to everyone else. Now, when I go on vacation, I actually take mini restorative breaks for myself. I'll go in the bathroom, put my legs up the wall. I'll sneak in meditations. I'm diligent about keeping up with my habit stacks. Stuff like that helps prevent me from having a treacherous post-event collapse after a vacation, because whatever our energy output is, that's what we're gonna have to recoup afterwards. Okay, so in order to understand about PECs, you first have to understand the sine wave concept used in bright line eating here. So here we've got what is called the crash and burn zone, the danger and destruction zone. So bright line eating is a food addiction recovery program. It is a weight loss program for some, but for most, it is a way to get rid of their food addiction and binge eating disorder, and for some people even to help with anorexia, because it's a food plan that helps you eat enough food. So most people come into an addiction recovery program with what's called a crash and burn sine wave. So sometimes, you're way below in the danger and destruction zone in the heart of your addiction, and then you're like, today's the day, I'm gonna go up. And you go up, and then you just turn right around and you start crashing, boom. And you tend to have this cycle of these highs and these lows, and your sine wave kind of looks like this. Now, Susan Pierce Thompson has written a book called Resume, and I highly recommend you read it. And she describes this cycle in much better detail in that book. But the goal is a few things with our sine wave. The first goal is to soften the edges of those highs and those lows, like so. And we do that by adding a lot of grace and understanding to our lives. Okay, and the goal is we are kind of making our whole sine wave a little less extreme. So then what happens is our whole sine wave is still kind of at this point dipping into the danger and destruction zone, but we have softened the edges of it. You can see that, right? So now the goal is we start adding habits. We start adding things to our lives that support our life. And the goal is we are actually going to raise this entire sine wave up so that both of our highs and our lows, our natural rhythms in life, are happening above that danger and destruction zone. So we want our sine, my paper's getting crooked here. We want our sine wave to be somewhere up here, right? That's where we want to be living. Because then even in our natural rhythms, when we have a low, we are above our sine wave. Now, here's where things get tricky. So let's assume a perfectly healthy sine wave pattern here. Here's our danger and destruction zone. Okay, crash and burn. This is where we're binge eating. This is where we're relapsing, right? We've got a sine wave that's above that. So we have our highs, we have our lows. Let's say we've got a few habits, but when we're in our lows, we kind of drop those habits. We skim pretty close to the line, but we're not going below the line. PEX is post-event collapse. What happens when we collapse is usually we have already come to the bottom of our sine wave, and then we have gone too far. And so instead of climbing up the sine wave, the whole wave gives out. Guess what that looks like? It looks like an inversion of this. So what's happening? Whoop, losing my thing here. What happens here is we end up doing this instead. This is post-event collapse syndrome. And this is a problem for a lot of people in their addiction recovery journey because they are not prepared. Their sine wave is above the danger and destruction zone most of the time, but their program is not strong enough that it's above the danger and destruction zone when they have a collapse. So what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve here? What we want to do with our sine wave is we let ourselves have our downs, but when we start going up, we use that momentum and we make our habit stack stronger. We make our community involvement stronger so that we've actually gone higher. See, this is higher. And then we let our natural rhythms happen. And then when we start that upswing, we use the momentum to make our program stronger and we get up higher. And then what's going to happen if from here I have a collapse? What does that collapse look like? Okay, that collapse looks like this. Look how far that is from the danger and destruction zone. See how this PEX is not in the danger and destruction zone? This is where I am right now. This is what has happened on my current post-event collapse syndrome episode. So what does post-event collapse syndrome actually look like? It looks different for everyone. For me, I can kind of have a range of symptoms. Right now, I'm experiencing a really intense post-event collapse, and I can tell you exactly what it's from. About 8 to 10 weeks ago, my husband broke his leg, and the roles in our marriage shifted. There were things that had to get canceled. I had to take on his workload, and his recovery has been slower. But up until now, I have been running in a caregiver role where I haven't been able to stop and reflect. And then last week we went on vacation with my husband's family, and it was a beautiful vacation that was restorative. This is a family where I'm safe to just do my bright line eating and feel loved and accepted in that way. And what happened was I was already at the bottom of my sine wave. And then I had to caregiver capacity more in order to clean the house, get my food ready, get us ready, go on vacation, I was doing a lot of inner work on vacation. That was exhausting. And then just because of where my husband's recovery is at, all the packing and loading and unpacking and every job for this vacation was only on me. And so from the bottom of my sine wave, I got lower. And then when we got home, I was not able to crash because we have things coming up and things that needed doing, and I'm still in a caregiver capacity. And so I kept going lower. And so what happened was, instead of when I hit the bottom of my sine wave, like that diagram shows, going up, I hit the bottom of my sine wave and my sine wave just gave out. Boom, we came crashing down. But here's the thing. Because I've been doing bright line eating for 2.5 years, because I have not had a break, because I have bolstered my program, because I have grace for myself to have self-care, that I take the naps, that I do the meditations, that I lean in, and if I need more support, I make my support net wider. I get more people in my program if I need it. I get myself seen. Because my supports are strong, my sine wave is high enough above the danger and destruction zone that even when I collapse, I am not dipping into that danger and destruction zone. I am not breaking my lines. I'm not eating sugar, not eating flour. I am not snacking. My quantities are bound to the decimal, to the point zero. Now, post-event collapse does not look pretty for me, let me tell you. I don't sleep well. My sleep patterns are off. My limits around caffeine kind of went out the window. I started having way more caffeine than I wanted to. I definitely started numbing out with my screens, and not even in posting, but just in doom scrolling, stuff like that. So I did put my, what I would call sobriety on the line during my post-event collapse. During this collapse, it also meant I stopped exercising, I stopped meditating, I stopped journaling, I stopped my inspirational readings. I copped out of a mastermind group. I kept a lot of thoughts to myself. I had a lot of isolator thoughts about not wanting to show up for things and wanting to get myself better first before reaching out for help. I had increased food chatter. I had a desire to not eat what I wrote down, but to eat something sexier, something that appealed to me more. I had to bookend that with my food commitment buddy. I had to tell her straight up, I want to eat something sexier than I wrote down, and I'm going to bookend that I ate my lunch that I wrote down. For me, that's about as close to the danger and destruction zone as I ever want to get. And there's a lot of things that were still in place. You notice I bookended with my food commit buddy. I was still writing down my food. I was still committing it the night before. I was still showing up for the morning accountability calls in the Bright Lifers membership. I may not have been reaching out for support, but I still have a lot of buddies on Marco Polo, so I was still staying up to date with them and possibly giving a check-in if it was asked for. So I was still being held by my support community that was normally up here, but was still holding me even though I wasn't even asking for that support. And I still have a certain level of self-respect and self-love that when needed, I was taking the breaks I needed. I was taking the naps. I was putting my legs up the wall. I was stopping whatever the hard thing I was doing to take a breath. And those kinds of skills are so second nature to me that they are like brushing my teeth. That is how automatic those things are. And it's that level of automaticity that serves you when you are in post-event collapse, because none of the other habits that aren't quite automatic are gonna stick when everything is collapsing. The only things that are gonna stick are the things that are anchored down. So what do you do when you find yourself in the ditch? Is there anything you can do? And I consider it a ditch. When I'm in PECs, I would call that a ditch. No, I haven't broken my lines, but for me, it's a ditch. So what do you do when you're in the ditch? Sometimes you gotta wait it out. Sometimes you gotta recognize when you're just crashing. And so that was the last 3 days for me. I just knew I was crashing. And all I did was tell myself, Krista, you're falling right now. And just like I imagine a little old lady who is really fragile and knows she's going down and having a physical fall, what's her goal? She's grabbing onto things. She's making sure her hands are in front of her. She's minimizing the damage of her fall. And that's all you can do at that point. So that's what I did. I took naps. I told buddies, I didn't tell anyone what I needed. I just said, I am in PECs. I am having a collapse right now. period. I just told people what was going on, and different buddies are going to offer support in their own ways that they know how to do, and that is beautiful and helpful. And I let myself fall. That meant I took naps. That means I went to bed earlier. It means I recognized for myself, I get symptoms of illness. And this was a really significant one because of what I've been dealing with. So the symptoms I'm getting are sore throat, swollen nodes, nausea, night sweats. I have had fevers and chills where I'm waking up and the bed is drenched in sweat. I am sleeping a lot. None of it is actually illness. I know that because I'm usually the last person in my family to get sick now that I do bright line eating. My health is so much higher that I'm way less likely to get sick than anyone else in my family. And for me to get sick first means that this isn't real. This is my parts being wound up and a collapse, and I've been working myself into this. So just letting myself fall, having compassion for the illness, taking a few extra vitamins to help with the recovery and my body's ability to heal. But mostly just that rest and that love and that allowance to collapse. If you don't let yourself collapse, your body will find a way to collapse. And just a quick story on that. When I heard about post-event collapse syndrome for the first time, my first thought was like, oh, that's what that was. See, when I was about, 7, 8, I don't know how old I was, my mom went through a season of post-event collapse. She was an LPN licensed practical nurse, and at that time, Canada had done away with having LPNs at all. So she got laid off, and she had to find a whole new career. That was a big deal. And then she also directed a huge musical production at our church that was like a really big deal, and it was all on her shoulders. She has ADHD like me, so the executive functioning of all of that was just next level. And it was kind of what kept her from crashing from the layoff. She kind of used that, and the cortisol kind of bumped her back up. But that wasn't a true escalation up her sine wave, was it? That was just stress and cortisol. And so what ended up happening is she spent 2 to 3 weeks in hospital with her asthma. Her oxygen levels were low. She had to be on steroids. And then for several years afterwards, she had to see a respiratory therapist weekly or monthly or something and get things adjusted. And it was a multi-year rehabilitation that she had to go through. And I remember this as a child. I remember watching her sitting in the hospital bed, and she had a bruise on her arm the shape of Africa from them trying to get an IV in her arm. And her whole arm was just a bruise, and they were just digging around trying to find a vein. That's what I remember from that. It's a very vivid memory of mine. But I remember looking at my mom, and I knew at that time, and she would say, I'm never again going to direct a musical. And she had a doctor that said that it was the layoffs that did this to you, and all these different things. And so when I heard about post-event collapse syndrome, I knew right away, that's a real thing. It is a medical thing. And if I don't allow myself to collapse in a healthy way, my body will collapse in an unhealthy way, be it a complete breakdown, be it a relapse into addiction, be it a relapse into food, be it a relapse into anything else. Your body will make you rest when it needs to. So sometimes the best way to maintain control is to choose how you are going to collapse. You do have that choice at some point, and at some point you lose that choice. And that is when that post-event collapse happens. But even within that, once you feel yourself going down, you can still minimize the damage, just like I did. So if we were to itemize this in a list so far, we've got number 1, prevention, knowing that you can prevent the collapse by minimizing your output in a stressful situation, okay? Number 2 is you can plan and make space for that collapse ahead of time. This is the controlling how that collapse is gonna happen type of thing to prevent it from being catastrophic. And then number 3 is if you know you're going down, you can minimize the damage. The best way to do that is to use your call help button, right? We're going back to the little old lady in the nursing home having a fall. Use your call help button. Just tell your buddies, just tell people, hey, I'm collapsing. I'm, especially if you're an introvert, especially if you're an isolator, just put that out there. Just tell people, hey, I'm isolating. And then period, end of sentence, go away. That's fine. Let them come to you. If you say that, they know you're reaching out for help. Minimize the damage, right? Preventative, planning, and minimizing the damage. That's where we're at so far. What about when it's all said and done? That's where I'm at right now. So the worst of my collapse is over. Okay, my sine wave has gone from high to low and from low to collapse. I am down here and I am looking up at this vast hill that I have to climb and it looks impossible. Where do I go from here? Do you know where I go from here? I put one effing foot in front of the other. That's it. That's all you can do. One step at a time. One day at a time. Your sine wave's not going to look like it normally looks. You're not just going to whoop and be up at the top. You got a long climb. There's a climb that's still a deficit. We're still below ground zero for our sine wave, okay? Half of that climb up is still going to feel like you're below your sine wave, okay? And then you're going to hit the bottom of your sine wave and start climbing up your sine wave again. You have a double climb ahead after pecs. So grace, 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 love and grace, patience and grace, love yourself. That's what you need in this season. One foot in front of the other and love. I realize that's not super specific. So I can only speak from my own experience. If your post-event collapse involves a line break, there is an entire course in the Bright Line Eating membership called Reboot Resume that is specifically for you. That will help you. That's not what I'm going to speak to. There's a course for that. Go get the membership. All right. What I can speak to is if you've had a post-event collapse, your lines are still bright, but like everything else has gone to crap. What do? You simply resume. You simply resume. But that doesn't mean picking up the entire load of your program all at once, okay? When you set up your program, you set up imagine it like a series of dominoes, okay? One by one. Each domino slightly bigger than the next because exponentially a domino can knock over a domino 1.5 times its size. So you've been adding things to your program until you've been adding dominoes this size, even though you started with dominoes this size. You are not going to be able to stand up exponentially, all these dominoes leaning against each other. You're not going to be able to stand those all up. Start at the beginning. Write down your food the night before. Get that done 3 days, then add the next thing. Okay, whatever that is, whatever your habit stack had, you are going to rebuild it from ground zero. So for me, because I was still writing down and committing my food, I was still doing the accountability calls, those things are still in place. So the first thing for me to do was to start waking up early and actually designating that chunk of time as my self-care time. That's it. Whatever I got done in that time was bonus. The only point was just to wake up and show up. So what did I do this morning? I did not work out. I can tell you right now, that's a big domino. That's getting added in last for me always. Working out is one of the biggest dominoes. It's not in there right now. I haven't worked out for 4 days, probably not working out for another 2 weeks. That is fine. If my weight starts creeping up, I can take out an ad. That's the magic of Bright Line Eating. I can have a very precise food plan for what my body needs. And right now, my body needs me to not exercise, but to get solid and bright again. Then we add in the exercise. For me, it looked like showing up this morning. And I was able to press play on the Monique Rhodes meditation and totally not focus on it, but pressed play and showed up. By the end of the meditation, I had basically accomplished taking 5 deep breaths. That's it. I showed up. It looks like finishing the last inspirational reading that I never actually finished the last time I was doing habit stacks. I got interrupted and didn't finish it. It looked like just finishing the last end of that. And it looked like doing my journaling, and then I actually did. That part I actually was able to do because I do it a morning pages style. So I just sort of verbally vomit. It was nothing profound, but I put pen to paper and I did it. That's it. Those are kind of like, those are things that are almost automatized completely for me. They're really easy for me, but they still fell off during a collapse. So those were the first things I put back in. Those are kind of my easy things. For me, the hard stuff is exercising. The hard stuff is some new spiritual practices I've tried putting in place, such as memorization. For the summer, I had added some gardening into my habit stack, so that has not been added back in yet either. Just baby steps, baby steps. There's no rush. This is my life. This is the rest of my life. It's okay if it takes me a month to recover from this post-event collapse. Do you know why? Because like I said, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. We're talking about a 10-week journey from my husband breaking his leg till when I collapsed, right? So it's okay if my collapse was a week and then it takes another month for me to really get back up there. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Have some grace for that. You are not going to outwill science. You're not going to do it. So have some grace and love and learn what you can in the journey. If you find yourself in the ditch, pick some flowers. There are flowers in the ditch. There is beauty in the ditch. There are lessons in the ditch. There is wisdom in the ditch. The ditch is a rich place full of life. Do not fear it. Do not aim for it, but do not fear it. Find the beauty, find the value. And when you're ready, get the help you need to get out of the ditch. And once you're out of the ditch, give yourself a breather and get back on the road. And you're not going to go from 0 to 60 in no time. It takes time. You're not a race car. You're a train building momentum. Imagine how long it takes for a train to start up again. That's what you're doing after a post-event collapse. It's a long process. But once we get going, boy, does our momentum carry us, and we barely need anything to keep us going, right? You'll get there again. You will, because that's the journey. One day at a time. I'm doing this one day at a time. I hope you will also do this one day at a time. Wherever you're at in this journey, I hope you are encouraged that where you're at is exactly where you need to be, and that you have love and grace for yourself. That is the most efficient fuel. Not guilt, not should do's. You got this.